Hello and welcome to the Real United States video blog, and this is day 2 of our shooting at Fort Pierce at the Civil War reenactment of the Battle of Fort Pierce, which is, well, there never was really a battle here, but this is an educational tool, and this is something that we do here in the United States and actually is done all over the world in reenacting battles from the Civil War. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go ahead and we're going to take a small stroll down here along Sutler's Row. And sutlers were individuals that sold goods largely to both sides. They were freelancers. Merchants often sold to only one side or the other. They would sell food goods and those sorts of things. Hard goods was a different group, if you would, and the sutlers, you'll see, have set up along, they would follow the army, and we discussed this in the previous episode, and sell hard goods. And so we're going to take a look along here at the Sutler Row. So,
oh, here comes trouble.
now here is a clothing dealer. And you will notice that many of the people here who are not necessarily going to be engaged in the battle are still dressed in period attire, and the attire that's for sale here is also period attire, and all that would have been the sort of things that would have been worn in the early 1860s. I see here from our sign that this particular outfit also has a gunsmith for people that need their firearms repaired. So you could actually have that done in the field. If a firearm broke, there would be a gunsmith available who could repair it, so you could continue on without having to replace it somehow. Replacements are very difficult to come by in the rural areas in the 1860s. Here we have our gunsmith.
Hello there.
And how you doing, sir?
Good, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. I'm Paul Campbell.
Jim Ball.
Nice to meet you, Jim.
I'm Corinne Ball.
Hello, Corinne.
Well,
Nice to meet you, sir. And we're from the Real United States video blog, and this particular week we're covering this event, so I just wanted to stop and show some of my viewers some of the things that you folks are doing here. And
I am the gynecologist.
this little play on words for you that are watching this from foreign nations. Gynecologist sounds a bit like gynecologist, and you'll have to look that up to understand why that's funny. So you see the gentleman here is working on what appears to be an 1860, no, that's a little bit newer, isn't it?
No, this is an 1859 Remington.
That's an 1859 Remington, okay.
New Army 44.
There was when Remington made basically two versions of their weapons. They made an Army, and they also made a Navy that varied in materials because of the saltwater conditions associated with the Navy. Both fine weapons. This is a 44 caliber.
Navy
So
was a 44 also, but the barrel was a half-inch shorter.
okay,
They made a 36 in that.
they made a 36 caliber, yeah. And
Well, I'm going to let you work on that. I'll be back later.
so that's.
All right, Jamie.
Thank you very much, gentlemen,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you, honey.
Appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
A great deal of the materials that were sold here, of course, there were uniform replacements and canteens, many things that the soldiers would use, that the sutlers would carry along and sell to the troops as they moved from battle to battle across, well, much of the nation. And we're talking about a huge chunk of real estate. that's really kind of outside of the purview of this video to explain to you how much area the Civil War covered. But these people would travel many, many miles following the armies to supply them with goods and services. And this particular vendor, of course, has uniform jackets. Interestingly enough, both Union and Confederate, and hats and haversacks, and of course hats and whatnot that would have been worn by either civilians or perhaps cavalry officers, and a lot of all the little odds and ends that you would have used in the 1860s for sale.
That's blue. That's navy blue. Just like mine, navy blue. Oh. Except this is fine wool. That'd be for a senior officer.
One of the interesting things to note is that there were available a lot of things that for repairs. The soldiers would make repairs in the field. Here's buttons and insignia and whatnot that might have been lost in the course of their duties that they could purchase and they could replace in the field. Many young men became skilled with a needle and thread, which at that time was unusual. You didn't see tailors, you saw seamstresses, but they became skilled in the field because, well, necessity is the mother of invention. And of course, footwear. Lovely boots. I'd love to be able to afford a pair of these someday. And bayonets. One of those things you didn't really want to have to get close enough to resort to, but you did. And holsters. So pretty much everything you could. And oh my God, is that gorgeous. That is a drinking mug from the era. The interesting thing about this is that it's not lined. It wasn't until some time later in our history that we realized that copper actually is poisonous to the human body, and these would have been tin lined. And to this day, copper cookware is either tin lined or sometimes stainless steel lined. But this is a gorgeous specimen of what would have been made in that era. And although this is a reproduction, a modern reproduction, this is very much what you would have seen in that day. They've been made out of a number of materials, and steel and pewter and things that we wouldn't normally think to use as cooking or drinking vessels today. Now here, ladies and gentlemen, we have what would have been an Army field hospital. Like I say, if you were lucky enough, you could be transported off the battlefield and not have to be worked on right on where you fell. This is where you'd land. You would land at an Army field hospital where you might get a cot or you might be laid on a pad on the ground. And our surgeon would try and repair whatever damage had been done to you. In that day, surgeons didn't necessarily have to go to college or have a surgical degree. In the naval forces, it could be even worse. In both the Confederate and the Union, the carpenter sometimes doubled as the surgeon. So,
can I answer any questions for you, sir?
well, you must be our Our surgeon.
I'm actually the assistant surgeon. The surgeon stepped away.
This is the assistant surgeon from the
47th New York Regimental Field Hospital.
47th Regimental Field Hospital, and you can see that they're prepared for, well, as just about everything they can be prepared for. Obviously, we're expecting a lot of traumatic gun injuries and large weapons injuries, cannon fire and shrapnel, and they would use what the best technology that was available for the day. One of the interesting things, may I touch this?
Certainly, sir.
I'll take a laudanum.
Is that they would use sponges, which were, this is a real sponge, this is a live sponge, this is an animal. For those of you that are familiar with it.
Who called me that?
And
That's the laudanum.
No, that's strychnine.
now, gentlemen here, you're here asking for laudanum, which, believe it or not, really is still made. There's one manufacturer in the United States that still makes laudanum to this day, and what it is it's opium dissolved in alcohol, and it was the best painkiller of the day.
It's even the best one today.
It is in fact one of the best ones today.
Immensely addictive.
Yes, it's immensely addictive, and today it's very, very expensive. It's actually much more expensive than the more potent things you may have heard of, such as Dilaudid or Oxycontin or those sorts of things. It's very, very expensive, but it is still available to this day. And some of the things that we've shown you before, a trepanning tool, or trephaning, depending on how you pronounce this, for relieving pressure, basically drilling a hole in the skull. And well, this is one of my favorites. I should have brought mine, the flask.
Absolutely.
Absolute necessity when you're in the field is a little nip.
We
Yes.
didn't use germ theory. They didn't understand germ
Yes,
theory.
they did not, in that period they would not have understood germs. It was the body's humors, which again is a little bit tough to explain in the time frame of this video, but a very different way of looking at medicine.
They treated the symptoms rather than the problem.
Exactly. Now this is as a prop, of course, but yes, they would actually take this large strap to use as a tourniquet, correct?
Yes, sir. This one
And-
right here is a small tourniquet.
Yes.
You can see it as a buckle. It will be adjusted. We'll be using this later today
Mm-hmm.
to simulate. So we'll do an amputation in
Right.
the hospital.
So that's, yes, it was a very, very difficult time, and these surgeons did their work under incredibly difficult situations. Today's December 8th, and it's incredibly warm. Much of the Civil War was fought in the southern United States. Heat and humidity promote infection, which they didn't understand. There's an enormous amount of bacteria, an enormous number of bugs, mosquitoes. The times would have been incredibly difficult, especially for these men. Now, perhaps of some interest is the fact that there was no technological advantage between the Union, no significant technological advantage between the Unions and the Confederacy in their surgical techniques or their surgical equipment. Availability, perhaps, was somewhat more difficult, I think, in the Confederacy.
Yes, sir.
But the technology was essentially the same for both sides in this war.
Now we have another saw that we had. We mentioned the skull earlier. These would
Yeah.
normally be done in pavilion hospitals in the back. People would be evacuated by train if possible.
If they were fortunate enough, if they were not in such terrible critical condition, yes, they would, as he said, be evacuated to rear area hospitals.
I will be doing triage on the field today, and basically when I look at the wounded, if they are shot in the abdomen or anywhere in the thorax, I will mark them as dead. I'll give them a drink of water, a little spirits to send, salve their spirits. But they're there. We're not going to do anything with them. We can't save them. They didn't understand germs, so if you cut in the peritoneum or into the pericardiac, forget it. it's going to be infected.
This is the sac surrounding the heart.
There's no immediately they'll die. The head is
Yeah.
the same way.
Now let me ask you, for medical officers on both sides in the field, I see you're unarmed.
Yes, sir.
Is that would be considered typical?
Yes,
you would be
because
unarmed?
we go out under a flag of truce.
And as gentlemen on both sides, you wouldn't fire on a medical officer, right?
No, you did not ordinarily fire, and that is why we do not carry arms on the field.
See, so it was a different time. You would not fire upon a medical officer of an opposing army. It would be unthinkable. The combatant is no longer a threat to you, and the medical officer is unarmed and is only trying to do no harm. So it was a very different time.
Well, the problem was,
It did happen.
yes,
Of course it did happen. There's, well,
some
you
people
know,
never
there's
get
a
to
jerk in every group, but in general, in society, it would have been considered in terribly bad form. Although I don't know that you'd have necessarily been reprimanded for it, although I'm sure that happened as well. Largely, these gentlemen were, like I say, they were non-combatants, and they were treated, at least largely, as such.
Yes.
So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your
Thank you
time. I
very much.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
The problem with doing a lot of this is that it is a bit like doing a play, a live play, or a movie, and that there's a lot of preparation and a lot of standing around in anticipation for the next act of the play to begin. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with the soldiers in the field awaiting the beginning of the reenactment. Now, we have apparently going to have a reenactment of a field triage, which is a field surgery, which hopefully we'll catch. But again, the actors, the reenactors are actors, and they are standing around anticipating the beginning of action. And I have no way of knowing when that's actually going to be done, because this is very similar to the way we do things. There's no real script. It's just sort of done on the fly. You can see here now that the Confederate forces are preparing to load and fire their field artillery. The beginning of the engagement. Now you gotta realize here in Florida that the Union Army were the invaders. Florida had seceded from the nation, and so the battles that were taking place here, the Union Army was considered an invading force. And you can see here that this is our cannon crew that we actually spoke with yesterday, preparing their gun and getting ready to fire. And that, gentlemen and ladies, is the beginning of the incursion. You can hear calls in the distance for the other artillery piece to be prepared. And our crew cleaning and swabbing. And now you'll start to hear some small weapons fire, rifle fire, musket fire coming from the invading force from the Union Army. Beginning to hear the rifle fire, the musket fire. Now we have a sniper here on the banks of the river which is, you don't think of snipers being something that were used a lot, but in fact they were back as far as our Revolutionary War, who would take cover and one shot, one kill with a special scope on the rifle. And you see him trying to take cover behind whatever is available. And this very long brass scope. See, this is a massive weapon, a 50 caliber weapon. And return fire from the field artillery piece. And our sniper has fallen back a little as our cannon crew is preparing another round, and our troops from Florida are moving into position. You see, these are quite large caliber weapons that were used in the day. Not terribly accurate. Some of them were rifled on the inside. Come back, there are reinforcements now coming up, preparing to take their position. A second group behind the first would fire while the first should be reloading. Troops again moving closer and closer, trying to find cover where they can. And the cat calls, if you will, of the troops trying to intimidate the enemy by sheer psychological warfare. The rebel yell, as we call it. Another one of our snipers with a heavy rifle. And you'll see that there are fallen soldiers through the smoke, and the commander asking for a ceasefire on both sides so that they can recover the bodies of their fallen. And they do this. They would just, both commanders would agree to stop firing and allow them an opportunity to recover their wounded or dead. It was, in its own way, a civilized kind of war. Certainly more civilized than what we see today. It was still war. It was still horrible and bloody, and people died. But the way war was conducted had a good deal more civility about it. People looked at the world differently than they do today. It was about defeating the enemy and not about body counts. And you can see that they've been allowed to remove their wounded. And there's the surgeon's assistant in white that we spoke to earlier, a non-combatant who would not be fired upon. And here you can see the Union retreating into the distance from overwhelming numbers. Thank you for joining us on the Real United States Video Blog. We'd like to thank you for joining us here in Fort Pierce, Florida for the fictitious reenactment of the Battle of Fort Pierce. And we hope you've enjoyed this, and we hope that you have learned a few things along the line. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and we'd be happy to get back to you. We hope you'll take time to pick subscribe above and join us. You can always find us without cannon fire on Facebook or on MoTube. And as always, thank you for watching.